Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into one of the absolute most fascinating aspects of the human experience. We're looking at how we grapple with the difference between reality and illusion. Now, the human mind is an incredible pattern recognition machine, right? But it's also, frankly, incredibly susceptible to bias, imagination, and self-deception. Whether we're curling up with a really good book or trying to discover a life-saving medical cure, our brains are literally constantly blurring the lines between what is objectively real and what we passionately want to believe. So today, we're going to explore this tension. We'll be looking at two vastly different worlds: the playful, totally made-up realm of literature and the super high-stakes arena of medical science.
Okay, let's dive into this brilliant little provocation from the writer Jorge Luis Borges. He asks, why does it disturb us that Don Quixote be a reader of the Quixote? I believe I have found the reason. These inversions suggest that if the characters of a fictional work can be readers or spectators, we, its readers or spectators, can be fictitious. Wow, that is a truly profound philosophical idea about the precarious nature of our own reality. I mean, if the fictional characters we read about are reading about themselves, how do we know we aren't just characters in someone else's story? It's a concept that's meant to deliberately unsettle us, and it perfectly sets the stage for the journey we're taking today.
Here is our roadmap for The Explainer today. First up, tilting at windmills. Then, Section 2, the game's metafiction plays. 3, the quest for objective truth. 4, the phases of a trial. And finally, Section 5, protecting against human bias.
Let's start with Section 1, tilting at windmills.
You know, this motif perfectly captures the human mind's sheer capacity for illusion. You've probably heard the phrase tilting at windmills before. It comes directly from Miguel de Cervantes' classic 1605 novel Don Quixote. In the story, Quixote famously attacks these ordinary windmills because he genuinely, truly believes them to be monstrous giants. It perfectly represents this inherent human bias we all share. We all have the capacity to incorrectly perceive our goals or our adversaries because we're blinded by our own internal narratives. Don Quixote completely blurs the line between fiction and reality. And as you'll see, that blurring is something we constantly do in our own lives too. Moving right along to Section 2, the game's metafiction plays. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how in the subjective world of literature, authors purposefully exploit our susceptibility to illusion. Think about reading fiction. It's essentially a game of pretend. We willingly suspend our disbelief. We know the story isn't real, obviously, but just to enjoy the experience, we play along. We accept the conventions of fiction, allow a nameless narrator to take over our consciousness, and safely entertain these illusions. We just play along with the author's game. But then we hit metafiction. This is fictional writing that self-consciously and systematically draws attention to the fact that it is, well, a made-up artifact. Authors like Cervantes, Borges, and Paul Auster, they don't let you just comfortably suspend your disbelief. Actually, scratch that. They don't just stop there. They actively poke at you. They deliberately unsettle the reader by making the act of reading a game you are actively conscious of. They constantly force us to reconsider who gives a story its meaning and who is actually in charge of constructing reality. Which brings us to Section 3, the quest for objective truth. We're pivoting hard here because, listen, while blurring reality is a super fun intellectual thrill in a novel, it is incredibly dangerous in medical science. Think about the two approaches. On one hand, you have subjective illusion. This is Don Quixote fighting his imaginary giants. It's driven by human emotion and passion. The problem is, a passionate medical researcher might subconsciously see a cure where there is only a windmill. On the other hand, you have objective reality. This is Quixote's sidekick, Sancho Panza, looking at the exact same landscape and seeing actual windmills. In medical science, the randomized controlled trial is our Sancho Panza. It's the grounded objective framework completely designed to strip away our biases and emotional illusions, so we can evaluate the hard objective truth. Let's look at how we get to that truth in Section 4, the phases of a trial. Let's move to and see how this builds, because it takes a really rigorous anatomy to piece through our subjective illusions. Clinical trials are built in very strict progressive phases. Step 1 is Phase 1, which is entirely about safety. It's just about finding the maximum safely tolerated dose in a really small group. Once that's established, we move to Step 2, which is Phase 2. This is an exploratory evaluation to see if the treatment actually has a functional biological benefit. Finally, Step 3 is Phase 3. These are the massive, pivotal, confirmatory trials designed to definitively prove that meaningful clinical benefits actually outweigh any associated risks.
And speaking of meaningful benefits, science uses a very specific tool to anchor all this abstract data into objective reality. It's called the MCID, or the Minimal Clinically Important Difference. You see, it's not enough for a drug to just slightly change a number on a blood test. The MCID rigorously defines the absolute smallest difference that actually matters to a patient's daily life. For example, say you're running a spinal cord injury trial. Gaining a tiny bit of motor function might look statistically significant on paper, but if it doesn't actually help the patient feed or dress themselves independently, it hasn't met the MCID. This brilliant concept forces researchers to rigorously define what is real and beneficial in the actual everyday reality of a patient's life.
Finally, we reach Section 5, Protecting Against Human Bias. So what happens when the scientific guardrails fail and we succumb to our own Don Quixote delusions? Well, to understand our modern guardrails, we have to look at history. Humanity has been trying, and honestly, sometimes tragically failing, to get medical objectivity right for a long time. Just look at this timeline. We go all the way back to James Linn's 1747 scurvy trials, through to some incredibly dark spots like the 1932 Tuskegee syphilis study, the 1957 launch of thalidomide, and the totally catastrophic TGN-1412 Phase 1 trial in 2006. So the crucial point is that our modern clinical guidelines were quite literally written from the lessons of these devastating failures. In that 2006 TGN-1412 trial, researchers gave 6 healthy subjects an experimental antibody simultaneously, all within 1 hour. It caused all 6 of them to suffer catastrophic organ failure. Because of that, today's Phase 1 protocols dictate giving a drug to just one person at a time and waiting to observe the effects. In the 1950s, thalidomide was given to pregnant women for morning sickness under the totally false belief that it couldn't cross the placental barrier. It caused thousands of severe birth defects. That is exactly why pregnant women are almost universally excluded from early clinical trials today. In the Tuskegee study, researchers unethically withheld the known cure of penicillin from impoverished men just to observe the disease's progression. That horrific failure led to the fundamental establishment of institutional review boards and strict informed consent. And this brilliantly illustrates how those past failures literally wrote the rules that keep researchers firmly grounded in reality today. We now use double-blind randomization to strip away placebo effects and the hopeful bias of the investigator. We use strict inclusion criteria for totally clear data. We rely heavily on independent data safety monitoring boards who have the power to halt unsafe trials immediately. And we absolutely ethically guarantee the standard of care for control groups. These strict rules act as our modern Sancho Panza. Wow, we've covered some truly incredible ground today in this explainer. From the wild pages of Don Quixote to the incredibly strict protocols of clinical trials. And it all boils down to how we perceive the world around us. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Whether you're getting completely lost in the pages of a novel or taking a prescribed medication recommended by your doctor, who is constructing the reality you are experiencing? Is it the author? The researcher, your own inherently biased mind, or objective data? And most importantly, how do you really know it's the truth? Keep questioning the narratives you consume. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.